Olha o canto tecnológico.
Não sei. Bem, Telmo, bem diferente. Falta-nos um bem com Telmo.
Só estão a ouvir? Estão-me a ouvir?
Tudo bem?
Estão?
Sim.
Ok. Então vou
Olha,
desligar.
já tens aí alunos contigo?
O quê? O quê? Ei. O quê?
Tens alunos contigo?
Tenho aqui a sala com várias pessoas.
Ok.
Tenho alunos, tenho professores e tenho a Sara Garcias, com quem estou já a gozar há um bocado de tempo.
Olha, e diz-me uma coisa. E os vossos alunos da primeira edição já estão online? Não. Não temos ainda alunos
Eu
online.
não sei verificar quem é que está online ou não, porque eu não tenho
Quem é que consegue? O Miguel está aqui a ajudar, não é?
Tem que ser alguém desse lado, porque foi quem
Ok, é o Miguel. Ele
aqui,
controla
as
tudo.
pessoas que estão em uma
O
sala
Miguel é um controlador.
estão a entrar aqui e vão seguir a partir de um sistema centralizado, com colunas de som, e quando eu falar, venha este computador, de resto nem sequer vou estar aqui, porque não é preciso, porque assistimos num ecrã projetado.
Ok.
Ok?
O professor Luís Osterbeck é o coordenador para a parte do IPT, porque isto é um doutoramento partilhado online entre a UAL e o Instituto de Tecnologia. Eu coordeno pela parte da UAL e ele coordena pela parte do IPT. E isto é uma experiência inédita neste doutoramento, porque é o primeiro doutoramento online. É o primeiro que faz uma parceria entre duas instituições, uma pública e privada, não é? E é o primeiro que tem alunos internacionais. Portanto, nós temos alunos desde a América Latina, a França, os Camarões, Angola. Onde é que nós temos mais? Temos imensos. Na Bélgica, enfim, nós temos imensos alunos em vários. Na Colômbia, na América Latina, em vários sítios. Não é? Portanto, é assim, muito inovador, felizmente correu muito bem. E agora já temos imensos alunos inscritos agora. Temos mais. Eram 11, desistiram 2 por outras circunstâncias, ficaram 9. E agora temos mais 11. Se calhar para o ano não conseguimos abrir, porque não temos docentes para orientar esta gente toda. O nosso caso foi então Miguel, porque um dos conferencistas do ICEU estava nos Estados Unidos, o do ICEU, que está agora aí para a Europa, E a sorte é que ele tinha gravado uma conferência. E nós vamos pôr o vídeo da conferência dele. É que realmente. O que é que se faz? E nós, terça-feira, à tarde. Combinamos terça-feira à tarde, porque há um modelo que é o do seminário 2, que está muito bem.
Ok.
E vamos por esse, fazemos todos iguais.
Sim, sim. Eu só estou aqui com um problema dentro, mas acho que resolve. Supostamente está resolvido. Não é bem? Estava aqui com um problema de neto. Já volto.
O doutor Luís Santos, está-me a ouvir? Olá, está bom? Tudo bem?
Bem, obrigado. E,
Está bem. Olha, eu estive a combinar com o Luís.
sim,
Eu faço uma pequenina abertura só, depois passo aqui para o Fred
ok.
e depois passo para si, está bem?
Ok, perfeito.
E depois de si passo ao Telmo e ao Luís que vai apresentar os conferencistas, está bem?
Muito bem.
Ele está online, o Luís já está online.
Isso começava nos mesmos às 15.
Pois,
Estou dando mensagens em hotel.
o Fred. Então, veja.
Vamos mesmo.
Agora alguma coisa. Fred, não estamos.
Devia meter o fundo institucional, se eu tivesse. Ora bem. Eu tenho. Pior. Uhum.
Como se chama?
Luís. Luís,
Sim, Luís.
podes mostrar-te exatamente. Hum, Vamos fazer assim, portanto, o Adolfo abre. Estás-me a ouvir, não é?
Sim,
Portanto,
sim.
o Adolfo abre, depois fala, passa a palavra, não sei se a ti primeiro, se ao Frederico, portanto, vocês
Ele
falam.
disse ao Frederico, sim.
Hã?
Ele disse, o Adolfo disse que
Já
era
falaste com o
estaria.
Adolfo. Então
Sim, já
pronto,
falei com o
ok.
Adolfo.
Não sabia, desculpa. Pronto. Então,
Não há problema. Luís, em inglês e português ou
inglês e
e em-
português.
Ok.
Curto, mas inglês e português.
Correto.
E depois o Telmo apresenta o depois e depois eu apresento o Steve Anai. Ok?
Perfeito.
Olá, boa tarde.
Olá, boa tarde.
É melhor sim.
Olá, boa tarde.
Não está. Hi. How are you, Trenton?
Good.
So you already know the procedure, Trenton?
I don't know, no, but I'll learn quickly.
No, it's nothing very complicated. So Adolfo will start. Then he will give the word to the two directors of departments from the two institutions for a brief address. And
Okay.
then Telmo will introduce you.
Oh. Okay, boa ideia.
Okay.
Thank you.
Speak. And then you speak. Okay. I'm going to turn my computer off.
Posso? Ok, então, muito boa tarde a todos. Eu vou dirigir algumas palavras primeiro em português e depois em inglês. Quero cumprimentar não só os que estão aqui na mesa, mas também os que estão online, nomeadamente no IPT. Estamos aqui hoje para abrir um novo ano académico, da segunda edição deste doutoramento em Património, Arqueologia e Tecnologia e Território. Quero dar as boas-vindas aos novos alunos que vão agora iniciar o seu projeto. Quero também dar as boas-vindas a este novo ano letivo aos alunos da primeira edição, que acabaram por finalizar os seus projetos e que estão agora vão agora continuar para formular as suas teses. Good afternoon. We are here to open this new academic year of PhD, Heritage, Technology and Territory. I would like to grateful to Professor Trent to be here to do his conference. I would like to welcome to the students, new students from the second division, and the students from the first editions. They are now to finish, to try to finish his PhD. Now I go to give the floor to my director, Professor Frederic Vidal, to say some words, okay?
Obrigado. Boa tarde a todos. Vou então falar em inglês, que foi pedido pelo professor Adolfo Silveira. Então, I'm very pleased to open the second edition of the PhD program in Heritage, Technology and Territory. As you know, this course is a result of a long-standing partnership between Universidade Autónoma de Lisboa and the Instituto Politécnico de Tomar. This second edition marks a new milestone for the success and the internationalization of this PhD program. UAL and IPT offer an innovative course, and the focus on the distance learning model is creating optimal conditions for establishing a new teaching and research community. And this community is sustained by the dynamism and creativity of all of you, national and international students, and obviously and the professors. So this scientific project also offers a new research perspective at the intersection of history, archaeology, technology, and heritage studies. Its aim to integrate multiple disciplinary approaches, challenge traditional boundaries, and provide students with a diverse range of theoretical and practical perspectives. So as a director of the Department of History, Art and Humanities of UAL, I welcome all new students. Our department will provide all possible support for the next 4 years. I wish a wonderful second year for the student, to the student of the first editions. And I would like to express my gratitude to the representative of the IPT, Professor Luis Santos, all colleagues and professor from UAL and the IPT, and especially thanks to Professor Adolphe Silver, Professor Louise Osterbeck, and Professor Telmo Pereira for their contributions to the success of this study program.
Thank you. Thank you. Now I give the floor to Professor Luís Santos, diretor da Unidade Departamental de Arqueologia, Conservação e Património do IPT. Professor?
Good afternoon, everyone. Well, eu posso começar a falar em inglês, mas vou falar também em português. Primeiro gostava de cumprimentar todos os membros da mesa e agradecer o convite de estar aqui hoje presente neste doutoramento que é tão importante para a nossa instituição, especialmente pela continuidade e por este segundo ano. So now in English, I'll try to thank you all for the invitation, and I would like to compliment my colleagues from the table and from the session. I would like to just say a few words regarding the importance of this PhD program. You know, humanity activity over the past 50 years has transformed the Earth's landscape to such an extent that, you know, scientific consensus, despite some objections, of course, is that we enter the new geological period. You know, the one division that we call Anthropocene. So obviously, the importance of mankind and humans and the study of landscapes and heritage and territory and technology associated to this, being on subjects such as landscape science, geoecology, landscape ecology, or traditionally scientific branches of geography, not only, but also associated to the archaeology and to, you know, the remains from the past. So this is very important to learn from the past experiences in order for us to understand exactly how humankind is more adequate nowadays, is addressing these problems, that territorial problems, identity problems, cultural problems, and even geopolitical problems, which are affecting our landscape and the way that we perceive the world today. So the pertinence of such a subject to be addressed in a PhD program is for us extremely important as a Polytechnico, and obviously for Autónoma University, to jointly address these issues. It's of the utmost importance for the future of research in this subject. I would like to also say that personally, I'm leading a special issue on landscape science. If anyone is willing to publish something on that subject, I will be able to offer some possibility to do so. And obviously, I would like to welcome as the head of the Department of Territory Conservation. Sorry, not territory. My bad. Archaeology. It's wishful thinking. Sorry. Archaeology, Conservation, Restoration, and Heritage Department of the Polytechnic Tomar. I would like to welcome everybody, all the new students, to this program and wish them a very, very profitable learning process over the next couple of years. Thank you.
Presentation. And now, so Tom, I think he want to say something and to do the presentation of Professor Trent.
Thank you. I'll be in English and in Portuguese also. I will be very short. First of all, I want to welcome everyone, especially the new students that are starting the first year now, and transmit all my support and from all the professors to the students that are in the second year. This has been a very nice and interesting and powerful journey. I hope that you enjoy it and you have fun along the years. I will start to present Professor Trent, look what Lucas gave me to me when he was here giving the talk. Mr. Cass from the Rising Star. So I remember to bring this one. Professor Trent is a professor at the Anthropology Department of the Tulane University in New Orleans, Louisiana, United States. He is also an honorary research fellow at the Center of the Exploitation of the Deep Human Journey at University of Witwatersrand in Johannesburg, South Africa. He's a world-known paleoanthropologist, and I have to say, a very good pal. Professor Trent studies the late Australopithecines. He studied the origin of the genus Homo, the hybridization, the fate of the Neanderthals, and the origins of Homo sapiens. He has numerous of publications. One of the last is the book Cro-Magnon, the story of the last ice age, people of Europe, that you should all read. It's serious, it's a very good book. Congratulations, Trent, it's a very good book. And he has been involved in the study of Pleistocene human remains from and Pliocene human remains from many key sites around the world, including the discovery of Homo naledi from the Naledi chamber, the Rising Star cave system in South Africa. He has also been working in Portugal for more than 20 years. So welcome, Trent. I'm going to repeat everything in Português. Portanto, como eu disse, vou ser muito breve. Em primeiro lugar, quero dar as boas-vindas a todos, não só aos alunos que entraram agora e que eu espero que se divirtam durante estes próximos 4 anos, mas também transmitir o meu apoio, o apoio de todos os professores deste curso e dos outros que estão associados a todos os departamentos ao longo do vosso doutoramento. O professor Trent é professor e diretor do departamento de Antropologia da Universidade de Tulane, em Nova Orleans, Louisiana, nos Estados Unidos. É também investigador honorário no Center of Exploitation of the Deep Human Journey, na Universidade de Witwatersrand, em Johannesburg, na África do Sul. É um paleontólogo mundialmente conhecido, também é um grande amigo. Ele estuda os últimos australopitecos, estuda as origens do género Homo, estuda a hibridização, principalmente o que tem a ver com a evolução humana, o desaparecimento dos Neandertais e a origem do Homo sapiens. Tem inúmeras publicações, sendo uma das últimas o livro Cro-Magnon, The Story of the Last Ice Age People of Europe, que, como eu já disse, é um excelente livro que todos devem ler. O professor Trent tem estado envolvido no estudo de restos humanos pleistocénicos de muitos sítios relevantes em todo o mundo, incluindo na descoberta do Homo naledi na Câmara de Naledi, no sistema de Rising Star da África do Sul, e também trabalha em Portugal há mais de 20 anos. Trent, the floor is yours.
Muito obrigado, Telmo. Infelizmente, não falo bem português, pois vou falar em inglês, desculpa. Mas obrigado outra vez. Thank you so much for inviting me to the new students. Good luck on your journey. It sounds exciting. Brings back a lot of memories of starting my graduate program as well. So I thought today I would talk a little bit about the last book that Telmo mentioned, the book I wrote. So let me share my screen. And mostly the material I'm going to talk about is from, I believe, the 8th chapter of the book, but there's some other parts as well. Can everybody see the presentation? Mais ou menos? Okay.
Very well, very well, very well. It's great.
Oh, good. I want to get rid of some of these floating meeting controls because they get in my way and I have trouble seeing the actual slides. So I called the talk today Perfect Strangers, Neanderthals and Modern Humans in Ice Age Europe. For me, this is one of the most fundamentally interesting things about our past, is that today we are the only species, Homo sapiens, the only species on the planet. But that's really unusual. For most of our past, we were not alone. We had other species with which we interacted. We now know, as I'll talk in a minute, we mated with them on occasions, and the genes of some of these species remain with us. And for me, I guess the interactions and potential interactions between Neanderthals and early modern humans has always fascinated me. We know Neanderthals, we've known they were different from us back when we studied just their anatomy, and we could tell that they were different. And so there was a huge debate when I was first in graduate school about whether Neanderthals had contributed genes to modern humans. And of course, that debate was ultimately resolved with genetic data. So we know, and everyone in this room, there might be some people who know in various rooms, I know this is broadcast out as well, who know their percentage of Neanderthal ancestry. The sort of world champion modern human with the most Neanderthal ancestry is this specimen from Romania, a Waza 1. It's about 38,000 years old, plus or minus a couple thousand years. And the sequences are so long, the Neanderthal sequences in this individual, that they think perhaps 4 generations back, this individual had a Neanderthal ancestor. Hopefully you can see the arrow. Awaza has the highest proportion, estimated proportion of Neanderthal DNA, much higher than what we see among people today. The other thing that and Telmo mentioned this in his very kind introduction, I've always been interested in hybridization between mammals and sort of using data from modern mammals to talk about potential hybridization between human species in the past. And what fascinates me is that in 2018, this relatively nondescript piece of bone, which they used zooms and discovered it was human, and then they were able to extract DNA from it. This is Denny, or Denisova 11, from Denisova Cave in southern Siberia. It's an F1 hybrid, which is just amazing. The mother of this individual, it was an adolescent female, was a Neanderthal, and her father was a Denisovan. So we have 2 species that come together on occasion at sort of what I believe are the ranges of their sort of population or species range, and they're interbreeding and producing offspring. And an F1 hybrid, the fact that we found it, to me, suggests that hybridization is much more common in the human past than we realize. Because when hybridization occurs, of course, you have an F1 hybrid, but it's unlikely that it's going to find another F1 hybrid with which to mate. So it's going to mate back into one of the parental populations. And so in most hybridization cases, what you have are individuals with varying percentages of one species versus the other. So the Neanderthals, we know that they split from us somewhere between, say, 300,000 to maybe as long ago as 700,000 years ago. In terms of fossils, the oldest that I would consider fully Neanderthal are about 230,000 years ago, and they last to about 40,000 years ago. Geographically, they're dispersed across Europe, all the way over to southern Siberia, and we also find them in the Levant or the eastern shore of the Mediterranean. Thus far, they have not been recovered in far eastern Asia or in North Africa or sub-Saharan Africa. And of course, the Neanderthals, while they're alive, they are actually, our ancestors, our more direct ancestors, are also alive in other parts of the world, and specifically, the earliest evidence of Homo sapiens, or our species that we have, is in Africa, and then just outside of Africa in the southern Levant. And so the potential is, of course, at some point, our ancestry lies in Africa. Homo sapiens emerges there, and then, of course, it gets into Europe. Now, you all are in Iberia. I don't need to tell you that in Iberia, one can see Africa from southern Iberia, and one can see Iberia from northern Africa. But I don't think this is a major conduit for populations moving into Europe, because the waters there, the currents are very treacherous. And so, yes, occasionally I think people were able to make it across the Strait of Gibraltar here. But I think primarily the route through which Homo sapiens came into Europe is here. Because of lower sea levels, there's actually one has a land bridge between the Balkans and what is now Turkey. We can't rule out some gene flow in this direction as well, but as you can see, the Caspian Sea extends much farther north than it does today, into pretty hostile territory. I would think that in the Pleistocene, one would need a lot of technology to deal with. And so I don't think there was a lot of gene flow from this direction. I think most populations of Homo sapiens moving into Europe would have come this direction from the southeast. And of course, all that's old is new again. The middle to upper Paleolithic transition has always been an important part of archaeology of Europe. And primarily because there was such a seemingly stark contrast between the middle Paleolithic artifacts, which in Europe are only associated with Neanderthals thus far, and then the upper Paleolithic, which for years and years was only associated with anatomically modern humans or Homo sapiens. And we may be coming back to that. I'll talk about that in just a bit. But this, there's art, there's blades, there's tools made on material like bone and antler, and all sorts of novel things that we don't see in the Middle Paleolithic seem to arise very quickly in the Upper Paleolithic. And in particular, what I want to talk about today, primarily, not exclusively, but primarily, I'm going to talk about what are now known as initial Upper Paleolithic industries in Europe, or the IUP. These are sometimes referred to as transitional industries. And then the big question is, who's responsible for them? Because these industries are right around the time period where we anticipate modern humans coming into Europe and Neanderthals ultimately going extinct. Now, in 1979, many of you may be aware that at Saint-Césaire in southwestern France, a Neanderthal was recovered from a Chalopyronian layer. That Neanderthal has recently been direct dated to around 40 to 42,000 years old. The Chalopyronian is associated with blades, which is a hallmark of the Upper Paleolithic, particularly these backed bladelets or Chalopyron knives. There are also at 2 sites, and I'll talk about this in a little bit, where there are ornaments, pierced teeth, and other kind of ornaments associated with the Chalopyronian. This was shocking in 1979 that a Neanderthal was associated with this Upper Paleolithic industry that was thought to be the work of modern humans. And of course, as I said earlier, all that's old is new again. There's now a big question as to whether the Chalopyronian is in fact associated with it's associated with Neanderthals, and perhaps it's only associated with modern humans. So again, who is responsible for these initial Upper Paleolithic industries in Europe. So I'm going to just go through them. We'll start with this one because I find it really fascinating. This is the Neronian. And the Neronian, the site that it's most important with regard to the Neronian is a site called Mandrin Cave, which is in the Rhône Valley of southern France. And it's an important site because the Rhône is essentially a conduit, a natural corridor for movement between the Mediterranean and Europe north of the Alps. So it's a super important site. And it's overlooking the Rhône Valley. It's high up on a hill. There's been years and years, decades by Ludovic Slimak, I apologize, who's a French archaeologist who's been digging there for decades, just slowly accruing information about this sighting, putting it together, and it has a fascinating story to tell. There's this industry, this IUP, the Neronian, that appears very briefly in Mandrin Cave. It has Middle Paleolithic Neanderthal-associated remains below it, and above it, there's Middle Paleolithic, again, this post-Neronian Middle Paleolithic, but the Neronian itself is an IUP. It's an initial Upper Paleolithic industry. It has things we'd expect to see in an Upper Paleolithic industry. It has this worked red deer canine. It's got a bone point with these notches. It has an eagle talon with cut marks on it. And then this is a long sequence, and obviously you can't see this. I want to zoom in on part of it, just this part of the story right here. So I'm going to zoom in on that. And what you can see here is down at this lower level, this level F, there's a China Mousterian associated with Neanderthals. Then there's this brief Neronian IUP level above it. And then after that, again, we're back to the Middle Paleolithic. So this brief Neronian industry, this IUP, is sandwiched between these Middle Paleolithic layers. And you can see if you look at the 95% confidence limits for these dates, this industry is very brief indeed. Its appearance. Can you all hear me? Okay. Okay, good. And so then within the Neronian, they found a deciduous or baby tooth. They used 3 different ways to reconstruct the missing part. So you can see that part of the tooth is missing. They used a Neanderthal portions, estimated using Neanderthal teeth. They used a modern human tooth to estimate the missing parts. And then they just used a geometric method. But all 3 estimates of the tooth fall within other Upper Paleolithic modern humans. And then here, Holocene humans, these are people alive today and away from the Neanderthals. So this baby tooth is associated with the Neronian. And so what we have, again, we have Middle Paleolithic. We have tens of thousands of years of Middle Paleolithic, presumed Neanderthals, and there actually are some Neanderthals associated with these levels. Then we have this brief modern human level in the Neronian. And then we have the Neanderthals return for 10,000 years. And finally, we have proto-Aurignacian, which we assume are modern humans who come back 10,000 years later, 44,000 years ago. To me, what really astounds me is this is not modern humans just waltzing into Europe and knocking out the Neanderthals within few generations. This shows to me, and this is my bias, and perhaps people will call me on it, this shows that there's not that much difference between Neanderthals and modern humans in terms of adaptability in that sense. It's not a simple story. So that's the Neronian. I want to talk a little bit about this IUP industry, the Bachokirian. It's from a site called Bachokiro in Bulgaria. This site has been dug for a long time. Dorothy Garrod dug there in the 1930s. In the 1970s, there was a lot of material that was recovered, some of which unfortunately has been lost in a pretty massive cave, this cave. This is some recently published data. So here are some late Neanderthals. These are presumed Neanderthals that are presumed to be associated with the Chattoperonian, an IUP industry. We'll talk about them later. But as you can see, Bachokiro, these are very early IUP individuals. These are some more later individuals. So these are Aurignacian associated individuals from Bachokiro. And as you can see, the dates are pretty early. So for prior to the discovery of that modern human in the Neronian at Mandran Cave, these were the earliest modern humans in Europe. So hovering around 46,000 years ago. The artifacts from the IUP at the Bachokiro, they have things like blades, they have bladelets, they have organic ornaments. So we've got the pierced animal teeth and other kind of implements made out of bone and antler. And then they also went back to the collections from the 1970s. And there's some new material that they found as well. And this bone fragment, which I don't think you can tell much from its anatomy, etc., but using zooms or zooarchaeology, using mass spectrometry, they determined that the collagen within it was human. And then within some of those individuals that were determined to be human bone, the sort of undiagnostic, hard to identify bone, they were able to extract mitochondrial DNA. And so you can see that several of these individuals either fall among other late Pleistocene individuals from Europe, or they fall among recent humans from Asia. And in fact, it looks like this Bachokiro individuals are actually have living descendants, unlike, say, Awaza from Romania that I mentioned earlier. Awaza has no, as far as we can tell, no living descendants. These two specimens have identical mitochondrial DNA, so they may, in fact, be the same individual, or it could be that they're siblings. And then the Aleutian. Now, the Aleutian is fun. I'm going to talk about the Aleutian in Italy, but there's also the Aleutian in Greece. It's about 45,000 years ago to 40,000 years ago in terms of date, roughly equivalent to what we just discussed in Bulgaria. A couple of sites, La Fabrica and Cavallo. La Fabrica cave here. Here's a view of it. Here's the Aleutian industry. This is a profile, so you can see that there's Mousterian or Middle Paleolithic below. There's this brief lens of the Aleutian, and then on top of that is a Proto-Aurignacian layer. And the Aleutian has blades. Again, this is something that's considered a hallmark of the Upper Paleolithic industry. There's also bipolar reduction. The Aleutian is famous for having direct percussion in this bipolar production or reduction where you have an anvil and you set your stone on it and then you hit it with another stone. That's bipolar. It leads to irregular shapes. And then some of these irregular shapes are what are known as lunates, which are the type fossil of the Aleutian industry, these moon-shaped implements, pretty small implements, because this is just a centimeter here. And there's also from La Fabrica an ochre-stained bone awl. You can see the ochre that's remaining on it. So it has all the sort of classic hallmarks that we'd expect to see in an Upper Paleolithic industry. And then at Grotta del Cavallo, they recovered two baby teeth again, deciduous molars. And this is by Benazzi et al. In 2011. And the deciduous molars fall within the range of modern and Upper Paleolithic modern humans or Homo sapiens and away from the morphology of Neanderthals. So this suggested that the manufacturers of the Aleutian were in fact modern humans. That has been called into question by individuals such as Joao Zilao, for example, who says that in that layer, that Aleutian layer, there are Dufour bladelets. And Dufour bladelets, which were described by Denise de Saint-Vieux-Baude, are in fact a hallmark or frequently seen as a hallmark of the Proto-Aurignacian industry. So there is a possibility that at least at Cavallo, that layer that's said to be an Aleutian layer could be mixed Aleutian and Proto-Aurignacian. And if the Aleutian is made by Neanderthals, say, and the Proto-Aurignacian is made by modern humans, then we can't know for certain that the Aleutian is made by modern humans. And then there's this industry that goes by a lot of different names because it's in a lot of different countries, Lincolnbian, Rhenesian, and Gersmanowician. You can see I've pointed little arrows to Germany, Belgium, England, and Poland. And just this year, I'm sure everybody here has heard this already, at Ilsenhohe, or Ranis in Germany, we have a well-dated, intact Rhenesian level, dates to around 45,000 years ago. We've got blade fragments. We've got the sort of hallmark point of this industry. And they were able to extract DNA from the actual sediments there. And the individuals from this Rana site are shown in red, and you can see they're falling among other early modern humans. There's a Waza, Zlatý Kun, I haven't really talked about it, but that's from the Czech Republic, and falling in among these other Upper Paleolithic modern humans, which suggests that at this site, this IUP industry was made by modern humans. And then the one I'm going to focus, I'm not going to really talk about the Bohunicean and Zletian today. The one I'm going to focus on the most is because it's in the area of the world that I enjoy working in the most, is the Châteaubriand, which is found in northern Iberia and in what's now France. So there are some important Châteaubriand sites, roughly dating from about 44,000 to 40,000 years ago. Some of these sites, many of you may be familiar with. The Grotte du Renne at RCCQ is very famous. There's several sites at RC. The type site is Grotte des Fées, or Fairy Cave. Châteaubriand is the name of the town. Quincé, Saint-Césaire, Le Piage, Roque de Combe, and then in northern Spain, El Pendo. So I want to talk a little bit about this. The Châteaubriand, as I mentioned briefly before, is kind of a mix. It has some blades. These backed bladelets are Châteaubriand knives. It has some implements that look a little more like a Mousterian or Middle Paleolithic implements, but it has lots of worked bone, lots of worked antler, and it has at least two sites, the Grotte du Renne and Quincé. It's got pierced teeth and other kinds of ornaments. Now, when I wrote my book, and my book was just published in July of last year, I could say, and I did say in the book, that the only human remains associated with the Châteaubriand were Neanderthal remains. And that's, of course, that's no longer the case. So I had mentioned that there's some Châteaubriand associated material from the Grotte du Renne. And then, of course, Saint-Césaire, that famous specimen that was discovered in 1979 and said to come out of a Châteaubriand layer. There have been some dates about that, or some doubts, I'm sorry, some doubts about that from Brad Gravina, who's an American who lives in France, an archaeologist. He and Ofer Bar Yosef and others have started to question whether this Neanderthal was truly in a Châteaubriand layer. The issue is that when the Neanderthal was discovered, the skeleton was discovered, Bernard van der Meers removed the entire skeleton en bloc and took it back to the laboratory to excavate it out very carefully. And so now the archaeologists who are trying to reconstruct the structure of the site and figure out what natural layers are actually there from the data that were recovered, they're not sure now that that particular individual, that Neanderthal individual, was really from a Châteaubriand layer. So that's an issue. At RCCQ, at Grotte du Renne in particular, the problem is that, and we can blame our potential ancestors on this, they would smooth the floor. So there's evidence of them actually, when they move in, they smooth the floor, they create structures within the actual cave, and these structures surround hearths, and we can imagine, I heard an archaeologist once say that everything above the ground is imagined in the archaeological world. You can imagine sort of walls or skins hanging up between these sort of partitions, but they also dug post holes. So they dug post holes for these structures as well. And so some have suggested that this material, this Neanderthal material that's associated with the Chalcedonian, was perhaps removed from an underlying Mousterian or Middle Paleolithic level when these individuals were digging these post holes. So that's another issue, is perhaps the Chalcedonian is not made by Neanderthals. And then, to make matters worse, this article came out after my book was published as well. Bruno Moret, who's an old friend of mine, sent me this article, and it's an anatomically modern human associated with the Chalcedonian in that Gloire du Glen reindeer cave site in Arcis-sur-Cure. And it's not just in the upper Chalcedonian. So if you look here, we've got two blue layers that are sort of early to middle Chalcedonian. Then we have the green layer, which is later Chalcedonian, and above that overlies a proto-Aurignacian layer. This is where this individual, who's a modern human, was discovered. It's an ilium of a juvenile. It's very deep in the Chalcedonian. So it's hard to argue that it's some kind of mix up and that it's really from a proto-Aurignacian when it's way down here at the base of the Chalcedonian. Here is the actual specimen in question. So it's a little iliac bone before the three bones that make up the os coxa or hip bone have fused together. Here's a juvenile Neanderthal. This is Lemoussier 2. And then down here is a more recent Homo sapiens neonatal individual. So these are all neonates, or right around the time of birth individual. And just like we've seen before, in this case, they're looking at this particular individual, comparing it to a series of recent humans, and also a couple of Neanderthal neonates, Lemoussier 2 and Mejmeskaya 1. I apologize for the phone. And then we also have, so in all these analyses, this particular RC individual falls outside, falls away from the Neanderthals and sort of within or very close to the modern humans. So I've mentioned the Chalcedonian. I've talked about the Bactrian. I've talked about the Lutzian, and then the Rician or Lincolnbian. Those are all Upper Paleolithic or initial Upper Paleolithic industries. Part of the story we need to talk about as well is the Proto-Aurignacian and the Aurignacian, which spreads very, very rapidly across Europe, 44,000 years ago to about 41.5 thousand years ago. And so you can see a lot of Aurignacian, or a lot of sites that include the Aurignacian, are found across Europe very quickly. It spreads. These are the Proto-Aurignacian I've mentioned before, has those Dufour bladelets associated with it. Then we get sort of the classic early Aurignacian, which has the hallmark of it is this split-based bone point or antler point that has a split base at the bottom for hafting it onto a shaft of some kind. The lithic implements have scalar retouch. It looks like you have multiple resharpenings of these tools. So you can see several examples, either from Croix de Fay of France, El Castillo in Spain, and then Hohlfels in Germany. And again, lots of implements made on antler and bone in the Aurignacian, just like we saw in the Chalcedonian. And the split-based bone point, in this case, this is actually an ivory split-based bone point, or split-based ivory point. This is the hallmark of the early Aurignacian. So were there interactions? If you think about the dates I told you, where the Proto-Aurignacian and the Aurignacian are roughly around, spread all the way across Europe from about 44,000 years ago to 41.5 thousand years ago, they would have presumably come into contact with late Neanderthals. and how extensive were those contacts? What was there cultural exchange? Was there genetic exchange? Because again, we know that there's genetic exchange to some extent because I didn't mention it earlier. Bacho Kiro, those individuals have relatively recent Neanderthal ancestry. So a lot of these early modern, Zlati Kun I didn't mention, but is from Czech Republic. Awaza, a lot of early modern humans have Neanderthal ancestry. We have not yet found late Neanderthals that have evidence of modern human ancestry. And so when you think about the Chattoperonian 44,000 to 40,000 years ago, again, questions as to who's responsible for it. Neanderthals or modern humans, it's still uncertain at this point, I think. But these important sites are Grotte de Fay, Le Piage, Roc de Combe, and El Pendo. Now, the reason I'm bringing up these four sites, so the type site, Le Piage and Roc de Combe, and then El Pendo, is that these were places where there was supposed to be rapid interdigitation or rapid use of the sites by different hominins. And I call this the timeshare view of human evolution, where you have Neanderthals living in a site. If we assume the Chattoperonian is made by Neanderthals, again, that's a big assumption. Origination, modern humans coming in, again, it's dangerous to assume that the origination is made by modern humans. Thus far, it seems to be. As Dan Lieberman said years ago, he has a wok in his kitchen, but that doesn't mean he has Chinese ancestry. So tying in technology with biology or genetics or heritage is tough. But in any case, you can see origination layers, then there's a Chattoperonian layer, and then an origination layer on top. So at these sites, it looked like we had multiple occupations, Neanderthals and then modern humans within rapid succession of each other at these four sites. And when I was a graduate student, this was accepted. And sadly, at least I find it sad, this is wrong. This did not happen in this fashion. We do have interdigitation at Mandrin Cave, of course, but that's 10,000 years separating occupations of modern humans, right? Not this sort of, a couple of years of Neanderthals and then the modern humans come in, etc. How did this fall apart? Well, Jean-Guillaume Bohart, a French archaeologist, looked at Le Piage and Roc de Combe, which are two of those sites with the interlacing Neanderthal, modern human, or I should just say Chattoperonian and origination layers. And he discovered a few things. So at Roc de Combe, for example, he noticed that in parts of the site, there was the sort of classic expectation of what the order in which things appeared. So there's the Chattoperonian at the base, and then early origination above that, late origination, and then the Gravettian on top of that. And then down below, there was an area with just Mousterian implements. And in this area right here, so this is the profile view, there was a mixing that occurred in this central area. So this is profile. Let's look at planar view. And so what you can see is that lower part here is where the Mousterian or Middle Paleolithic was. The upper part is that classic sequence, as he calls it here, where everything's in the order in which you expect it to be. And then here in this middle area, there's been some mixing that's occurred, perhaps bioturbation, cave bears, perhaps it's some kind of clastic activity, but this is an artifact of the interstratification is an artifact of site formation processes. And then when he looked at Le Piage, it was sort of the same story. The original idea was that there was interstratification between the origination and the Chattoperonian, but when he did refitting and refit pieces together, he discovered that the Chattoperonian had come from up above, that it was by gravity, it had fallen So the Shadow Perronian, which was earlier in time, had actually fallen by gravity onto a pristine Aurignacian layer. And so it just looked like there was this interstratification of presumed Neanderthal and presumed modern human occupations. And then the third of these four sites, El Pendo in northern Spain, Ramon Montes looked at the material and discovered that the entire sequence is a secondary deposit. So it's a complete mess, which only left Grotte des Fées, which is the type specimen of, or the type site for the Shadow Perronian. Joao Zilao and colleagues noted that a lot of the faunal material from the Grotte des Fées shows telltale signs of hyena digestion. As you know, hyenas can eat bone, and actually the acids in their stomach wear holes into it. So these are bones that have been partially digested by hyenas. And what Joao Zilao and colleagues said in 2008 is that there was a human occupation in this part of the cave. Part of the cave was actually a hyena den, it looks like. And then the most, I don't know, scandalous is kind of a bad word to use, but the part that raised the ire of the most people is that Delpourt, who was excavating in the 1950s. Zilao and colleagues said that he was actually excavating into backfill from Bayeux, who had worked there in the 1800s, that Bayeux had finished digging in this front part of the site and then filled the hole back in with backfill, and that this is where that it looked like interstratification, but it wasn't interstratification. And Brad Gravina and Paul Mellers were published an article in response to this the same year, 2008, in which they accused Zilao and colleagues of bias and said that, you know, an excavator as experienced as Delpourt would have known when he was digging into somebody else's backfill. And then there was another article that came out that same year in a different journal where they tried to sort of mix the two together and say, well, maybe there's something going on here. But the bottom line is that at none of these four sites where we have this rapid sort of this idea that there were Shadow Perronian and Aurignacian layers rapidly following each other, none of those sites has that panned out. And so we do have Neanderthals surviving relatively late. This is modern humans very early, perhaps as early as 47.5 thousand years ago at Ilsenhöhe. This is Geisenklostala, which is early modern as well. These are Aurignacian in blue, or Proto-Aurignacian in the case of Mandrin. This is Feldhofer. So this is the original Neanderthal specimen. And this is a direct date calibrated from inside, I believe it's the humerus it was taken. So it shouldn't be contaminated. The problem is that nowadays, and I know everyone knows this, we should really be ultrafiltrating bone to make sure that you're only dating the collagen that was present in that individual at the time. What we've discovered, and Rachel Wood said this in one of her papers, I think it was in 2013, is that if you have 1% contamination from modern sources of modern radiocarbon, that can make a 50,000-year-old object look to be as young as 37,000 years ago. So as much as I hate to destroy more of the Feldhofer specimen, I think this date is probably a little too late. It should be redated. Which brings me to my last topic of discussion. I hope everybody's following me okay. And this is Joao Zilao's Ebro-Frontier model, where he argued that we have early Aurignacian above the Cantabrian Mountains and north of the Ebro River, and that this Ebro River sort of served, and the Cantabrian Mountains sort of served as a barrier where we had very late surviving Neanderthals in this main part of the Iberian Peninsula at sites like Almunda, Zafaraya, and Cabeza Gordo. And then we also had sites with a long Middle Paleolithic into the Upper Paleolithic sequence, like Calderao, Gorham's Cave, where there was no Aurignacian 1. And this model, it kind of, it stood the test of time for a while, but again, when new dates started coming out and ultrafiltrated dates, the model started to show some problems. So for example, at Zafaraya, where there was a Neanderthal mandible recovered in the 90s that was thought to be as young as 30,000 years ago. There was a bone, a faunal bone dated there in the 90s to 33,000 years ago. It was redated using modern techniques, and it was found to be older than 46.7 thousand years ago. At Jarama, sort of in the center of Iberia, there was a Mousterian that originally had been said to be as young as perhaps 26.9 thousand years ago, 29.4 thousand years ago. When they redated that same specimen using modern techniques, it was about 50,000 years old or older. At Carihuela, which is down here in I think that's Andalusia, we have a Mousterian that was also very late, but when they tried to redate it using modern techniques, they found no suitable material. There was nothing had enough organic material present to date that material. And then finally at Gorham's Cave, where we have a very late presence in the Mousterian. Part of this, people know, just regular archaeologists are sure there's some mixing of Gravettian all the way through to Mousterian at one part of the cave. That's this anomalous, very late date. But this late date for the survival of the Mousterian at Gorham's Cave, it looks problematical. And so what Jonathan Hawes said recently is that we have some dating to do. We need to redo. There's some Almonda Cave, the Oliveira system, or the Almonda system, the Cave of Oliveira, excuse me, Cueva Anton, and then Gorham's Cave are the only sort of late surviving Mousterian sites left in Europe, and they kind of stick out like a sore thumb. And we also have some data that suggests the Aurignacian is actually pretty early in this south and west of the Ebro River. So Bajandillo, where the Aurignacian is said to be 43,000 to 40.8 thousand years ago, it remains controversial. Some people say that there's been clear mixing of those levels there, and so it's perhaps not Aurignacian. But the sort of strongest case one can make for the Aurignacian being early in Iberia is Picadeiro, which Telmo knows the site well. Lapa do Picadeiro, very hard to access, at least for an old guy like me, climb up the mountain to Picadeiro, where they have a sealed, secure Aurignacian layer that dates to as early as 41.1 thousand years ago. If modern humans, Aurignacian folks, are all the way over just 25 kilometers from the coast in Picadeiro, they could be anywhere in Europe, if you ask me. So what do we have? We have modern humans and we have Neanderthals, and they do overlap for at least a few thousand years, it looks like, in Europe. How often are they interacting? I tend to think these interactions were relatively rare. I'm not saying they didn't happen, but I think they were rare. And part of the reason I think they're rare is that the late Neanderthals don't show any evidence of modern human DNA. But the main reason is an idea that goes to Stephen Churchill, who said that Neanderthals were not apex predators in Europe and had to fit themselves around the carnivore guild because they were competing with things like cave lions and lesser scimitar cats for large game, wolves as well. And so they had to sort of fit themselves around. And as a result of having to compete against the carnivore guild, Churchill says that Neanderthals lived at low population densities, that they weren't living at high population densities. And he contrasts that to our presumed ancestors in Africa, roughly the same time period as the Neanderthals. Yes, there were big carnivores in Africa that they had to compete against, but much more of the diet could come from plant foods. Plant foods are going to be unavailable for much of the year in Europe. And so as a result, these modern humans lived at higher densities because they were not suppressed. Their numbers were not suppressed by the carnivore guild because they could include more plant foods in their diet. And then if you think about modern humans as really good resource extractors, they're going to start to increase in number. And it looks like the expansion out of Africa of these early modern humans is not ecologically driven as much as it might be demographically driven. And so when they do finally make it into Europe, I think they have greater numbers, more dense populations, leads to more rapid adoption of technology. And it may be that they were just had the demographic edge over our Neanderthal cousins. So, obrigado a todos pela atención. I hope everybody could understand me and I wasn't talking too quickly. I apologize. I wish I could have done this in Portuguese, but you know, I can't. So thank you for your attention. Thank you for inviting me, and thanks. And I don't know if we have time for questions or.
We have time for questions. I think we have some students here. I don't know if they want to make any question. They are shy. I don't know if there's someone online that wants to have any question.
Could be in Portuguese.
Yeah, the question can be in Portuguese. Fred will understand perfectly.
Can I ask a question?
Please.
Okay, thank you, Trenton. This was really very interesting. And my question is a rather methodological one. Although it's not my course subject of study, I followed all these discussions about the early dates and all the polemics in the beginning, particularly in the beginning, which in a sense echoed another discussion about early humans in Europe. In my reading, the so-called short versus long chronology of early humans, which in the end was settled with the new datings, but still in the mid-90s, there was a lot of this discussion. And for me, what was always very striking is that although it seemed to be a conversation, in fact, it was not. Because the two groups were speaking different languages. One group was primarily anchoring the arguments on whatever would come out from laboratories. So they would have a completely technological approach, or technological is maybe an exaggeration, but they were relying primarily on the absolute dates. And as, for example, today, people rely a lot on DNA results. And so the core of the argumentation was what comes out of what we can do with the best scientific analytical techniques available. And the others were saying that they relied primarily on the old-fashioned approach. By old-fashioned, I would say basically two things. One, stratigraphy, and you have shown cases of doubts on interpretation of stratigraphy. That would be the ground where both sides would agree on using. But nevertheless, I remember for the old chronologies, this was the discussion about sites like Vallonné, for example, or Totavel. But also the discussion you mentioned, Zafaraya. Zafaraya is a clear case where the recent dates came out, and a lot of people jumped saying, this is it. And those that all the time said Zafaraya was older, they were relying on their interpretation of the stratigraphy discarding the dates, and something else. And this something else was what makes sense. And the making sense, this is then my question. Because this is a tricky thing. When there is all this discussion in archaeology, and particularly in prehistory. To what extent do you think we can still use in prehistoric research what would be considered a humanities approach rather than a hard sciences approach? So if you want to comment on this.
Humanities approach. I was following you up until you said that.
When I say humanities, I say this idea of reasoning, of argumentation, of making sense, which is something, if you do chemistry, of course, making sense also is important, but it's a different kind of understanding of what makes sense. The notion, when I used to read some of the authors that always stood for, on one case, though, because they are pretty much the same people, it's pretty much the same people, that stood on one discussion in favor of the long chronology, and in the other discussion on the separation of the middle and upper Paleolithic and of the Neanderthals and modern humans.
Yeah, I think all data are important. I think the data are so few that we should use every approach we can. I know that I've talked a lot about DNA in here. I think that is still in its infancy. And I think a lot of what we talk about in terms of DNA and modern humans, the more data we have and the more complex things are going to come out to be. So I hope I'm not coming down on just purely let's go with what's most recent. I mean, stratigraphy is important. Common sense scares me because I'm worried that I do use that approach. And I worry that sometimes I can talk myself into an idea based on common sense. And common sense is a dangerous thing because, you know, what was once commonsensical, say, 100 years ago, is no longer commonsensical now. So I don't want to dismiss it. And I think your point about Zacharias, they were right. Common sense, I think, at least my interpretation is that they turns out that common sense ruled the day. But I do worry about using it. And I think in my book, I am sure I make the argument of common sense quite frequently. So can people who use common sense or old methods, humanistic methods, and people who are doing more scientific work, can we speak to each other and learn from each other? I hope so. I'm a little Pollyanna on that. I don't think I haven't gotten into these polemical fights with people. I had a little experience with that as a graduate student when I was studying Australopithecus. And boy, those people, they get me. And I thought I ran to the late Pleistocene because I thought, here are some people who are nice. And it's become more polemical, but I don't know. Did that answer your question?
You did. About the Upper Paleolithic, it's not that people were nicer, they were fewer. Now that you have more, you also have the same roles.
Oh, so.
Okay.
Luis?
Thank you very much.
Luis, do you have a question?
Yeah, if I may. First of all, thank you for your presentation, Trenton. It was really nice. Really enjoyed it. I have a question because I mean I'm a biologist, so I mean obviously I can comply with a lot of what you said regarding DNA and stuff. I mean, yes, it is in its infancy. It's a lot to do. Definitely, we need to do a lot still there. But when you talk about the African reality regarding the predators and being density driven, whereas in Europe, they had to fight for their, space within the predator ecosystem, well, if they were density driven, wouldn't they have to, suffer the same consequences in Europe regarding, fitting into the ecosystem? And therefore sapiens would face the same problems as Neanderthals, and therefore they would not thrive so well, because supposedly Neanderthals would be better adapted. They live there for longer. I mean, I'm assuming, yeah.
No. It's I think I left out. I mentioned it, but I don't think I emphasized it enough. What is key to that argument? Because you're absolutely right. I think the key is that because they were living in denser environments in Africa, there were technological advantages that came about in terms of technology that ultimately helped them once they get into Europe. And a lot of this, I guess I really owe to Churchill. I shouldn't give myself any credit on this, but they were apex predators. I think Homo sapiens was an apex predator, and it's because of technology. I tend to discount cognitive differences between Neanderthals and modern humans. That seems to be shifting as well. I gave a talk not too long ago, just last month actually, at a university, and I said, I'm probably in the minority of people here, and people are like, no, I think that. So there's this constant shift. I've been around long enough that I've seen things come full circle. So I tend not to focus on cognitive differences as explanations for Neanderthals' demise and ours. And I don't pretend to know what ultimately happened and why you and I are having this conversation and not a couple of Neanderthals are having it.
Sure.
Suspicion is that it's technology driven, and that technology takes off because of the higher population densities and having where a lot of the environment is other hominids.
And climate played a role, I suppose.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Climate had to play a role as well. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. I do like the look of your PhD program, you all. This is a really good idea.
Thank you.
Combination of tomorrow.
Magnificent lesson. It was very, very important for us. Thank you very much.
You should be here. You should be here.
I should be.
Actually, I should be there because it's the SAS, right?
No, you're welcome here.
Thank you. It's been since what, 2017? I haven't been to Portugal since 2017. Pois pá.
Trenton, you probably heard about the Bermuda Triangle, and the Bermuda Triangle is here.
No.
Yeah, whenever you fall into our web, you never escape. So, in fact, you are already involved in this PhD program, and we do count on, now without any joke, the PhD program we have designed is online primarily for one reason. We wanted to conduct research at the same time with an international team working together in different continents and different time zones. So the only way to do this properly is, of course, online and in an asynchronous way most of the time. And so now combining this will of ours also with the interests of the PhD students, hopefully we are getting in that direction. What I can promise you is that we have an open mind discussing things, and then we don't kill each other. A little bit like modern humans and Neanderthals, maybe. So, okay, thank you very much.
If you want, please, you can stay with us now, if you want. Luis, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Adolfo. First, also greet everyone present, particularly the new PhD students. My task here is to very briefly present to you Stephen Arment, and also to explain that he is not able to join us online against what was foreseen for personal reasons. and that made him be on a plane in this exact moment, and he could not avoid it. And so what in the end we will be seeing is a recorded presentation of the Bridges program. So it's not exactly what he was going to talk about. It is the same topic, but he would take it much more from the theoretical point of view and how these things evolved. And this is more like a presentation of the program, but I think it's also relevant for this PhD program. To give you a brief background, and Stephen will present this in the recorded thing that we are going to see. The new UNESCO program, Bridges, is ultimately a result of research conducted in an interdisciplinary framework involving many different sciences, and in which intervened people from biology, environmental studies, and so on. It is a program about sustainability. So it is about cultural landscapes, management of cultural landscapes, and sustainability. But it became, at some stage, this research group, which discussed things related to how should these topics be taught in university, what is sustainability science, and so on. One discussion was maybe the global framework of sustainability is wrong. It is not taking into consideration a certain number of variables. I will not anticipate which. And maybe UNESCO should play a role in creating a program to engage societies in a different path. Not completely different, so it's not completely against what is being done, but recognizing insufficiencies in what exists today. So there was a first step, which was this program of UNESCO on sustainability science funded by Japan. Then in 2019, there was a meeting of directors of research programs from various parts of the world that was held actually here in SESSÃO, in Portugal, that we organized, myself and John Crawley, that some of you heard last year in this PhD program. And there came the recommendation for UNESCO to create this program. So this is it. And Stephen Arpent, who joined the discussion in a quite early stage of this process, is now the executive director of the program. His background is in literature, is an important researcher of an organization called Humanities for the Environment. And actually the Bridges program is today a UNESCO program, but with a unique structure of management in which there will be, because this is not yet completely formed. For the moment, there is only a steering committee made of the 3 permanent positions in the board, in the future board, which is the International Council for Philosophy and Human Sciences, the Humanities for Environment, and UNESCO itself, UNESCO having the chair. And these 3 will then aggregate 7 more, which will include, for example, the International Science Council and other organizations, and also individuals. So some will be representatives of organizations, and half of them will be invited scholars from different disciplines and so on. So this is basically the introduction of Stephen. I'm sure that in the PhD you will hear about him and you will meet him because he comes on a regular basis to Portugal as well. And now, Adolfo, maybe you can play the records. And in the end, if you have any questions, I might eventually be able to answer, or at least pray to him.
I'm going to tell you about the Bridges Coalition, the UNESCO Most Bridges Coalition. And it begins, the story of the Bridges Coalition begins in 2015, when the Paris Agreement was being finalized, when UN Agenda 2030 was being finalized, and the Sustainable Development Goals were being agreed to by all the member states. And in tandem with that, I'm having some difficulties advancing my slides. In tandem with that, UNESCO decided to start a project called Broadening the Application of the Sustainability Science Approach. This was a 2-year project that was intended to look at the field of sustainability science as it had moved out of the Millennium Goals and the Millennium Project at the turn of the century. And it had been 15 years in order to make recommendations on how the field of sustainability science could be optimized to help member states that had agreed to the Paris, or were in the process of agreeing to the Paris Agreement and to the SDGs, how they could better meet their commitments. So they began this 2-year process with several workshops that were that moved around from Paris and UNESCO headquarters to Malaysia, and I had the opportunity to join into that project. It was funded by the government of Japan, and it produced a report or an outcome document called the Guidelines on Sustainability Science in Research and Education. And in that document, a number of recommendations were made about how the field of sustainability science could be better supported and how it could develop to meet the challenges that countries were facing now and would be facing in trying to live up to their obligations of the Paris Agreement and the SDGs. And we're halfway through that period now, the goal of 2030, and we're not doing a very good job at it, by the way. We're lagging very much behind. And so there's a deep sense that it's crucial to find new capacities, new capabilities and modalities that can help us to achieve these goals, because those goals are not arbitrary, they're not picked at random, they're informed by science. And we know that we're going to be passing certain crucial planetary boundaries if we're unable to meet these goals, and that it will be more and more difficult down the line for future generations, and even during the lifetimes of present generations, for people if they cannot actually get the climate crisis and the poly crisis under control, because we know it's linked to biodiversity and a number of other crises that actually are actually sort of central in our view right now. So coming out of that project, one of the things that those guidelines did was they recommended that the arts, the educational sciences, the qualitative social sciences, and importantly, the humanities as well, needed to be integrated more effectively into mainstream sustainability science. So they used this document that was produced to begin discussions with UNESCO member states through UNESCO commissions at national level to hopefully affect the conversation about how sustainability science could be better supported at national level. But it was still a very top-down, sort of policy-oriented and science policy-oriented conversation. A number of the stakeholders that had been part of that project that produced the guidelines of sustainability science and education met and followed up, led by, in fact, UNESCO, but also by SIPSH, which is the International Council for Philosophy and Human Sciences, and the Circumpolar Observatory of the Humanities for the Environment Global Observatory Network. And that's how I came into the work, because I lead the Circumpolar Observatory based in Iceland. And Humanities for the Environment is a network of observatory groups around the world, with 8 observatories presently in most of the regions of the world, that bring together humanists, that bring together humanities scholars, and work to actually make the knowledge from this community more accessible and more actionable within sort of the sustainability sphere. So what happened then was that a new project began or was formulated in 2019 and began in 2020 with a series of 4 more workshops. And a number of stakeholders were brought together for this project. 40 or so different member organizations, or they would become member organizations, met at UNESCO headquarters, met in Portugal at the Institute of the Polytechnic Institute of Tomar and the Research Center in São, Portugal, at the Sigtuna Foundation in Sweden, and finally at Cappadocia University, though they hosted the fourth workshop, but it was during the pandemic, so that was an online workshop. And as a result of this, a new instrument or a new organ was foreseen that would be the Bridges Coalition, that would bring together diverse stakeholders from knowledge institutions, academic institutions, but also from civil society and from other kinds of entities that sometimes fell outside of mainstream sustainability science, that fell outside of mainstream science policy work, like indigenous peoples as well. So I'll let this run for a moment to give you a sense of how we framed it at the time. This little promotional video was put together for our third workshop in that 2-year process that ran during 2020 and 2021 and culminated with a proposal to the Management of Social Transformations Program, which is an international science program led within UNESCO and the only one based wholly in the social and human sciences. And which is also, incidentally, an intergovernmental council made up of 35 member states. And as part of that proposal, we proposed that a new instrument, a new coalition would be formed that would be programmatic in its nature and that could draw together the diverse kind of stakeholders that had been part of the visioning process. And they're everything from large global organizations like ICOMOS, the International Council on Monuments and Sites, the International Science Council, the Club of Rome, Future Earth, the World Academy of Art and Science, to smaller organizations of more regional and local orientation, including indigenous communities. And what we saw as being necessary is a way of advancing this bridging work that would more successfully bring in knowledge communities that had not been part of mainstream sustainability science before, was being able to have all of these stakeholders, large and smaller, but with a key sort of engagement and a sense of mission and duty and real capabilities that they could be bringing to the table and sharing with one another. We saw it as necessary that these different entities could be sitting at the same table, working together on solutions. And so this is just a little bit of an overview. You can see that they're from countries from all over the world. And these were the original 40 or so members that formed Bridges and that are now the charter members of the Bridges Coalition. Bridges Coalition now has been going and has been operational and has had implementation capacity, let's say, for the past year to a year and a half. And we're in what we're calling the transitional getting start phase, I guess you could call it. And we have hubs based at Arizona State University. We have an international secretariat and a UK hub based at the University of Wales, Trinity St. David. Princeton University and CUNY in New York share a thematic hub. The University of Pretoria in South Africa also sponsors a hub at its campus in Pretoria. And then we also have the Club of Rome, a non-academic institution, but an organization that is a global think tank with its own very significant capacity that is also bridging in terms of the different kind of stakeholders that are involved in the Club of Rome. And then most recently, beginning right around now, we have a new hub beginning at the University of Cologne that is joining. And this is seen, as part of a process whereby we expect within the next couple of years to have more than double the original number of hubs, especially in regions around the world where we haven't had hubs or we don't have them now. In Asia, in South America, we have proposals being prepared right now from Uruguay, discussions in development with stakeholders and significant institutions in Japan and organizations in Japan and China, and in the Middle East as well, and in Kenya. I know I saw that there were a number of people at this meeting from Kenya. The idea is that we're going to augment the original group of hubs. These are just some photos taken from the launch of the different hubs that took place a little over a year ago, from Wales and ASU in this case. What Bridges is all about, and what Bridges is working to do, is within the UN system, working to build robust and transformative communities of knowledge, purpose, and action, and promoting through undertaking a wide range of activities with high-level partners, with regional, more local partners, different activities that actually can move the needle and on how we can have more inclusive, more equitable representation of knowledge communities that don't have a strong track record of integrating with strong academic institutions and natural science-driven sciences. So that's the idea behind Bridges, that we're bringing qualitative social sciences, the humanities, the arts, and educational sciences, as well as other knowledge communities, indigenous knowledge communities, indigenous science, we can even call it, and the knowledge from stakeholders, including youth, including other marginalized peoples who have very significant local knowledge, who have very specific profession-based knowledge. We're very interested in finding ways to create greater sharing and collaboration across divides where you don't often find a lot of these entities at the same table. So I'll just really quickly run through an example of some of the things that we've undertaken in the last year to advance this initiative. One of them is collaboration on Future Earth's Pathway Forum series. Future Earth sponsors a series of webinars every year called the Pathways Forum that's about advancing sustainability science in different ways and approaching it from different angles. And a couple of these a year, we do a team up with Future Earth where we're bringing the social and human sciences dimension, as well as knowledge from other non-academic knowledge communities and action capacities from communities outside of the academic mainstream into these discussions as well. And we host a couple of webinars. So you can go to the Future Earth website for Pathways Forum and find the webinars, the videos for the webinars archived there. We just had one a few weeks ago focused on climate litigation, where we were looking at the state of climate litigation around the world and how this transects many different communities, from the legal practitioner community, from the courts and lawyers and so forth, to academic communities that involve both climate scientists and philosophers and ethicists, to activist communities, small communities that are actually stepping up, and the ones who are actually leading the charge, often with youth at the center of these cases, on trying to get governments to meet their obligations according to the agreements that they themselves have committed to, but which they don't have a really great track record so far of meeting. And so that's often what these climate litigation cases are about. And so we had a Pathways Forum that looked at that. Last year at COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh, we sponsored, together with Future Earth, but also with ASU Global Futures Laboratory, some events, including, and we had one as well focused on, for instance, how we can draw upon local knowledge to better prepare communities for dealing with the situation of devastating wildfires. In Portugal, wildfires have just been absolutely devastating on communities in central Portugal. And there have been sort of place-based and community-based approaches that are a bit off the charts or a bit different from the mainstream approach to these. And we wanted to highlight how these communities were themselves taking the lead and formulating new approaches to how wildfires could be prevented or mitigated in their region based upon local solutions that were really, really ground up, that were really, really grassroots based, but that also involved municipalities working together with landowners to working together with other stakeholders. So that was one that we did at COP27. We did one together with some people we're going to hear about after my presentation, Iveta Silova, and we're going to hear about the Turn It Around project, which was in one of our sessions devoted to the role of youth and gender and indigenous communities, specifically in the Pacific, but where we brought in some cases also from the circumpolar north as part of the Bridges contribution to this session. And this is an example of one of the ones we brought in from the circumpolar north, focused on Alaska, indigenous communities in Alaska, and the link between heritage and climate change and vulnerable heritage as a result of what's going on with environmental change. So these are just a few examples. We're also working with the Earth League, with the Global Futures Laboratory at ASU, together with their international partners, on the 10 must-haves initiative and the 10 must-dos initiative, which is seen as another approach to complement the SDGs. Heidi pointed out, I think rightfully, that the SDGs are not perfect. They have their limitations, and the 10 must-have and 10 must-dos initiative is one of several complementary efforts that are actually being undertaken to see how we can better sort of fill in or be more successful where the SDGs are not entirely successful, or where they can't be because of the limitations of how they were framed to begin with. Finally, or almost finally, I'll just mention that we have developed working relations with the Learning Planet Institute, with, I mentioned the Earth League, but also the Commissioner for the Well-Being of Future Generations in Wales, the first position of its sort from a national position that is politically independent, that actually tries to take a look carefully at how public entities actually can actually be living up to the SDGs. And we're together with Learning Planet Institute in particular. Last year we partnered with them and had 6 different events at the Learning Planet Festival, which happens at the end of January every year. And together with some of our member organizations, or like the Club of Rome that sponsors a hub, we did something together with the Learning Planet Institute that introduced Bridges there then, because it was very new at that point. But we also looked at, again, different approaches to youth-led climate action, for instance, in the Arab region, in European youth, and reports that came out last year looking at specifically the state of young people and their sense of agency and empowerment, and their views about their future in regard to climate change. And so we had this really interesting session devoted to that at last year's Learning Planet Festival. We worked with anthropologists who were taking a look at how we could actually think differently in terms of the language that nature speaks, and how we could actually draw on that and fashion in maybe more effective action capacities and political approaches to climate change and environmental change. We looked at the case of the Kogi people in Colombia, and how their approach to indigenous knowledge, indigenous science is being developed as an alternative to mainstream Western science, and where they're trying to renew the water systems in their own lands and repair the damages that are occurring in the world right now. We looked at future backcasting experience and looking at examples based on, for instance, the idea of the Ministry of the Future. What would a successful future look like by placing ourselves through an imaginative act into the situation of being at 2050 already, and we've already been successful? Well, what did we do to get there? So we begin to do some imaginative experiments and thought experiments like that. That was one of the sessions. The Penn Program in Environmental Humanities, which is a member institution at University of Pennsylvania of the Bridges Coalition. They shared their My Climate Story project at Learning Planet Festival, which is a really powerful project among several that they're running there, that are looking at futures beyond refineries, for instance, and other approaches to what we need to do to actually be able to come to terms with the climate crisis and leave a habitable planet for the future. Beyond these, what I would say is that we've done other things focused with WASS, the World Academy of Art and Science, on youth-led knowledge and education for climate change and human security. And you can see once again, Iveta Silova, who's coming on after me, was in that session as well. And we were taking a look based upon some of the work we had done with the UNESCO reports and the European reports on youth and climate action, and brought in the Turn It Around report. And I think Iveta will probably say something about Turn It Around, so I won't step on her toes here. Finally, I want to flag up the fact that with Iveta, again, she's not listed here. You don't see her among those speakers, but she is one of them. So I have to bug Iveta to get her bio up in the Learning Planet Institute website. On the 26th of January, we're going to have an event where we're actually looking at poetry and how poetry can be mobilized both for learning potentials and learning capacities, but also the instilling of agency through opening up new expressive possibilities towards that move beyond the technocratic language of policy, that move beyond scientific language, and open up new senses of agencies and new appreciations, not only for the environment, not only for nature, but how human beings and human communities can live more harmoniously with nature. This is going to be part of this. So we're going to have a big poetry-based event at the Learning Planet Institute. And that's the one thing that we're partnering with LPI on this year, and really looking forward to. That will be taking place at Learning Planet Institute in Paris on the 26th. But it will also be streamed live. So we hope people here will choose maybe to follow that and see what approaches that we're going to be trying to promote in that event. These are just some examples from the last year of different groups. This is the minister, or rather the commissioner for the well-being of future generations on the right, with me and with my acting deputy executive director from Bridges, Lucy Atala in Wales. We then had an opportunity to meet up again with the commissioner and his team in New York during the UN General Assembly in the fall, to follow through on how we could begin preparing and thinking about aiming towards certain landmark things that are going to be happening in 2024 with the Summit of the Future, with the 100-year anniversary of the rights of the child, with an updating of UNESCO's in tandem with outcome documents of the Pact of the Future for the UN Summit of the Future. We'll be producing a pact for the future, but also UNESCO is in the process of updating its own guidelines or its declaration on the obligations to future generations. And so we met with the Assistant Director General in UNESCO for that. And we have a meeting coming up this coming week, and we're following through with a number of activities to see how we can actually bring these to bear more effectively during this year, where there's going to be some really monumental things happening. And educational capacities are necessary for all of these. I can't emphasize enough how education is perhaps one of the areas in which the most can actually be realized at different levels. If we're thinking specifically as well beyond education, beyond just formal education, beyond higher education, education at all levels, education from primary education, preschool, to secondary education, through tertiary education, but also informal education. So I think it's worth thinking about and talking a little bit more about how can informal and formal education and other kinds of learning systems be more effectively deployed and integrated with one another to be helping us meet the obligations that we know we have to meet. There are methodological dimensions to this. There are content-related dimensions to this. So these are the things that we've been discussing with our colleagues at Learning Planet Institute, with the World Academy of Art and Science, with Globe Ethics, and we're having similar discussions in China and Japan, especially anticipating having stronger anchoring of bridges in Japan and China and in the Pacific Asia region in the future. That was the Research Institute for Humanity and Nature, with whom we've had some very productive conversations in the last few months. So I'm a little worried. I think I've gone over my time, especially since that 4-minute delay just trying to get my PowerPoint to work. So I'm going to stop there, but there's a few more things I'm in a position maybe to elaborate on. And what I want to really make clear is that the Bridges Coalition is interested in identifying partners who are as serious as we are about bridging different communities, different action and knowledge communities. This was at last year's MOST Forum and the Intergovernmental Council of the Management of Social Transformations program, where we had a Bridges event as well. And we're going to have one coming up this year as well in April this year. And I won't share the links right now, but I do really want to emphasize that our approach is how can we actually target those areas that have not successfully been included as successfully in the past, and begin to bring them in through different measures that can allow us to build new structures that in the process of building those structures can help us not only to more effectively make the most of different systems that already exist, different organs that already exist, but renew them and create new structures, because I think we're going to really need to do that to be able to come to terms with the climate and the poly crisis that we're facing.
Rich, you want to comment on anything, please? Hello?
Yes, thank you very much, Adolfo. Obrigado. Just one observation, because as I said before, this is an overview presentation of the Bridges program, not so much addressed to researchers, but to policymakers. But this is what could be done given the circumstances. And I thank Stephen for that. I just wanted to stress that a certain number of the current students working in now in the second year of the master will have are already making contributions to the theoretical and also applied implementation of this new program. And the same will happen certainly with at least some of those that are joining the program now. And one curiosity, the meetings leading to the establishment of Bridges in SESSÃO, then in Paris, and finally in Sigtuna and in Cappadocia, we invited people that we knew were at concerns and that published about these things, but we didn't know exactly their academic background. And once we were in one of these meetings in Paris, we decided to present ourselves to check what was the academic background. And interestingly enough, the field of studies which is dominant is archaeology. And within archaeology is prehistory. So there are people from all disciplines, as you can imagine. But it's interesting that the understanding of how to build an interdisciplinary framework of research, and to a certain extent, a transdisciplinary framework of research, is probably easier for us that work as archaeologists or prehistorians, because that's what we normally do. Whereas in other disciplines, this is not so evident sometimes. But that's basically it. Adolfo, I give the floor back to you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And thank you for all, and for close these sections, because we are in time. Award for the first edition students who have finalized their first year and submitted their proposals projects. Without exceptions, we are pleased with the quality of all proposals, which are of high level of research. We wish them all the best and success in this non-stop journey. They will soon achieve their goals. For the students who are just starting now with us, we wish you every success in these realizations of the PhD, which I'm sure will be of the highest quality. We are here to support you, to help you, and to see that your proposals are finalized. I believe we are in the right way with the dedications of all our professors, students, to this experience of collaborations between EPT and WAL, which was been going on for a long time and which was become stronger day by day. We are grateful for the support and trust that both institutions have shown us. We would like to thank to all your present students, professors, and directors. And for finish, thank you to all. And muito obrigado a todos e bom ano agora de estudo e de boa continuidade. Eu penso que estamos na hora, não sei se alguém quer falar ainda. Luís, queres tomar a palavra? Não? Fred?
No, thank you very much.
Ok,
Thank you very much, everyone.
muito obrigado também ao professor Trent for your presentation, and I hope you can very soon with us, to us. And e a todos os alunos, estamos agora já, tenham atenção ao horário, e porque iremos começar as aulas como é natural. Então, adeus, boa tarde e tudo bom e grandes sucessos para todos vocês. Obrigado.
Bye-bye.